Yes, thank you again. I try to put some things together. The first, what strikes me with the rest of nature suggestion from Bruno David was I like to read these kind of papers with the eyes or with the eyes of the addressed ones. Do they understand really what we mean? This paper is something what goes out of our circle, and I think it should be understood by the ones who read it. And I think that the phrase "rest of nature" already makes a decision which is perhaps contradictory to that what we want to have. In fact, I'm very much in favor of this. We made some suggestions from the zoological side which are in there, but I would like to take on what Richard just said. Being the first time in such a community and being the first time involved in such a symposium, meaning the terminology. What I thought was very interesting, that we are communities, three, let's say the natural history museums, the botanical gardens, and the zoological gardens, and a lot of us have entities in the same town, but they do not know each other. They don't know the people which work there. They do not connect. I think that this would be a first step for everybody at home, because it's relatively easy to do this, and I would like to put here on the table that an example from the Rhine-Main region in Frankfurt. We have a network called Bio Frankfurt, and they are connected the two zoos, which has the biggest attendance in the state of Hesse. The Palmengarten, which is the botanical garden, the Senckenberg Museum, the town government with two different departments, the Department for Environment and for the greeneries, and the university also with different faculties. So this is a very interesting one. The board meets twice a year, and we have one general assembly. And so I think that is a very good thing, but what connects each other, and we have 1 week of biodiversity in which each of the members of Bio Frankfurt does something around this topic, and this brings us together. And the last thing, perhaps for a bigger community of us, what I was thinking of, we had this morning, and I think, Peter, you mentioned this about the 6 Sumatran rhinos somewhere in Borneo. You may remember this. I got it at my pop-up of my computer, which is the first Sumatran rhino born in human care. And with its mother, it's a very nice thing. And when we perhaps, and it is an old thing, but I would like to bring it on the table, that everybody is reminded that if we are able to save big flagship species like Sumatran rhino, like elephants, like apes, and so on, we need for that big habitats, we need big environments, and this covers also the not so posh animal species which are there around, and this helps the other ones also. So pointing out this, I think that may be successful when we can achieve this. Thank you.
Thank you. The point of working together in this community is broadly captured under number 13. The commitment which we insinuated you are making is written in point 13. The 3 communities working more closely together, both locally and globally, for example, and so on. So I hope you saw that we are making this commitment, and you gave a wonderful example how locally the gardens of animals and plants and also the educational facilities of natural history museums can work together, share exhibitions, and institutionally work together. Some of you do that already. Thank you. Words of wisdom now from you, Peter, and then I open it up.
First my words, and then you can go on to words of wisdom. No, I would say I disagree with the idea of dropping the word biodiversity. Nature is so vague as to be completely ambiguous, whereas biodiversity, which has now been in the literature for 40 years, is a very clear word meaning both numbers of species and the ecology that supports them. And I further noticed that the IBPES pronouncement is Summary for Policymakers of the Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And that's been written up in almost every major journal in the world in the 10 days since it came out. And I would be very, very, very opposed to backing off the word on biodiversity. Now, it seems to me that this is not a press release, and it's not a way of explaining to the general public what we want. It seems to me that it's a way of explaining, it's like the other report, it's a way of explaining to policymakers and to one another what we've agreed. And to do that, we have to do it in pretty precise terms. I assume that this will lead to writing something like a press release that we'll put out, and this can be an appendix or something you can call up as a website, but we shouldn't try to convert this now into a popular public statement, would be my view. I think it's very well written. I think the combination that you envisioned of having zoos, natural history museums, and botanical gardens together to talk about this point is original and useful, and I think that the discussions we've had have shown why it is useful, and I think the statement that we have here illustrates that quite well. It seems to me that in the various sections we've covered all the aspects of what those three kinds of institutions can do in this field, and I think having that in one document but centering around those three kinds of institutions is a very good thing. And I think any of us, whatever kind of those institutions we're associated with, or maybe more than one, would find this useful. So that's really all I have to say now. As you pointed out, Joachim, the editorial stuff I did on the paper didn't change the meaning of any of these points. It was just simplifying and shortening, basically, and I hope that'll be useful, but I have no pride of authorship in it, and I'll be glad now to hear what other people have to say. But I think what we want to know is, did we miss major points in this? Did we miss recommendations that we really want to make that are not there, but at this level of generality, so that they'd be useful to include while we're all sitting here together? Is there some aspect of this? Oh, and I need to add, my point about the Sumatran rhino, of course I agree totally with what Thomas has said about flagship species and saving them and why that's useful. My point was simply that if we don't save the world of plants, and if we don't think about biodiversity overall and the ecological concept, that the rhinos that we save will be standing there alone in the middle of a denuded Borneo, but or maybe they'll be sitting there in the middle of an oil palm forest, more likely, since most of Borneo is rapidly going to oil palms for Europe and the US. But I mean, you'd have to be nuts not to understand why flagship species are a good way to talk about conservation. Of course they are, and they always will be.
Okay. This is a statement of an academy, so it will be partly academic, as our academy likes to see itself. And yes, Peter, it will be referred to in a press release that will have simpler language. We don't need to be less scientific than the first chapter of Laudato Si, which is quite scientific. So I think we will find the proper balance between what we tell to the public verbally and in writing and what this document tries to get across to the interested and specialized public, the professionals.
Maybe I'll add, I'm active in the Pontifical Academy primarily because of the kind of values that were expressed by the last speaker and the kind of deep wisdom that was expressed by the last speaker and a couple of the more religious speakers. I wouldn't mind at all if we could put a bit more of spiritual values or of deeper motivations to do this in the document. I think that would perhaps come closer to the overall intention. It's not very much that way now. In other words, now the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, of course, is talking about science and technology and not about morality or religion or the Bible. But on the other hand, our intention has clearly been to use this setting here in the Pontifical Academy as a way to draw the kind of broader concern based on spirituality or morality that would really get this done. And as I've said totally tiresomely over these 2 days, if we don't get that kind of spirituality and general feeling and philosophical basis for this, I don't think we have a prayer, because I don't think we'll be listening to one another at all. So if somebody who talked in that way or anybody else would like to write a point
Okay.
or anything to move in that direction, I think we ought to, I would suggest we should consider it.
Yeah. Michael Volt, you gave me a sentence so far. We asked for 2 more. The sentence you gave me is in the first paragraph. We need to change, I quote, our mindset, our mentality of exploitation that has driven us to the point where we are now. You were more constructive in your statement a moment ago on how you arrived at hope, and maybe over dinner you can scribble that sentence or until tomorrow. Now I would like to open it up. There were a number of hands up here, and I simply go around the room. Go ahead, Philippa.
I would just like to emphasize again this split in language between biodiversity and climate, because that, people think of climate as being, to some extent, in the public at least, on top of the planet, the heat, the atmosphere, and that is really intertwined, deeply intertwined to the surface of the planet and within, and also beyond. And I think if we can have some sort of statement, even if the focus is on biodiversity and ecosystem services, if we have a statement that talks about the deepness of the planet and the expansiveness of life beyond the planet, and this is just talking about one aspect of it, that could not only make a statement about the integralness of nature, but can be part of the statement about the spirituality, is that we're just a moment in time in the universe. And I think that's really important, is not to just talk about a layer, but the interconnectedness of it.
Lori?
I just wanted to comment on the problem with the word nature. The way people do perceive it, unfortunately, is that it is separate from us and apart from who we are and apart from our lived local environments. So I just, even though I know biodiversity is a really tough word, and we use the terminology urban nature, nature and culture, it's still really important to not reinforce the sense that we're separate from, if that's already what is in the minds of people.
Yeah, I just want to comment on that. I totally agree with that. I just wouldn't eliminate the word biodiversity. I don't see why we can't bring in the word nature in the right places. It's so, but I wouldn't want to lose the other either.
No, I agree, but it's a matter of also, I think, making sure that people understand urban nature is nature.
Yeah.
There's life in the urban environment too with us. We are a part of it.
Okay.
So.
John?
Thank you. Pastor Wold, thank you very much for your talk. Like Peter and I think everyone else in here, it was inspiring. And I agree with President von Braun that it would have been nice to have that at the beginning of all of this to really set the tone. Along those lines, I wanted to echo Peter's sentiment that, to interject that somehow into this document, I think is critical. In looking at the points that we have in the order of them, I don't feel that 1 and 2 are first and second in the order. It seems to me more that points 12 and 13, particularly 13, the concept that together our 3 core types of institutions have a power to influence the world in ways that we could not independently. And I think that's the novelty of this gathering and the inspiration that we're gathering from that. And I think one of the wonderful ways that could be brought together are the quotes that you had from the encyclical, particularly the last one that you have. May our struggles and our concern for this planet never take away the joy of our hope. That's one of the core messages that being able to speak about these challenges in this context brings us. And if we can somehow interject that into this document, whether it's scientific or internal or what have you, but also then lead with that in any kind of press release or other document that we produce, that's going to create a novel voice that we're currently not sharing. The doom and gloom of everything that we all know and talked about at length over the last couple of days, me included, it's, as you pointed out, that's daunting. It leads people to apathy or worse. And I think, again, the opportunity here is great if we choose our words wisely and focus on hope.
Mm-hmm. Tyler, Mariam, and Virgilio, if you don't take the floor, I will ask you later as ex-political leaders, not now, there are a few more hands up. We need to get your reflection whether we got it reasonably right. But Pat, please.
Excuse me, I appreciate the comments made just recently by John and by Richard and Philippa. In that first paragraph, one of the vocabulary items that I think we need to agree on, I think saying non-bacterial organisms is a negative and complex way of talking about the items of concern here. And I would love to hear some recommendations on alternative terminology, higher life forms, multicellular organisms, species. You're talking about 4 of the 6 kingdoms. And for the uninitiated, I don't think they would understand non-bacterial organisms. Mm-hmm. So as you talk about things at dinner, perhaps we can have a conversation about the different terminology and come up with a standardized vocabulary that could be used in more places than just this.
That can be solved by saying other than bacteria. That would be perfectly clear. You can't do it in any of those other ways because there are lots of single-celled things and a lot of variety and all implied in the other. But other than bacteria instead of non-bacterial, yeah. I think makes it clear.
Well,
so
I
many-
think
so
that
many
if anyone can
species
come
not
up, this may be
accepting
an
that.
opportunity to coin a new term.
Well,
Okay.
And then the other comment I had is also on that same paragraph. I think it would be appropriate to reach out and grab the reader and include them in the conversation that this document proposes by adding a sentence toward the end of it, something like, we need to exercise our personal and collective responsibilities for global environmental stewardship. That brings the person reading the document in as a participant, not as an observer.
Thank you. Paul.
Just really a comment about how we frame the common denominators between natural history museums, zoos and botanic gardens. We've got elements of it in here, but I'd really like there to be a strong action component. I think, there is a danger, certainly in our community, is that we tell people there is a problem, and that's where it stops. Education, of course, is essential. It's a major component of all of our botanic garden work with all of our visitors, but it's also really important that we deploy our expertise, the huge repositories of data that we sit on, to be part of the solution. Because I think there's another element that we've barely touched on, and that is that we're often seen as elitist organizations. We might well be trusted, but museums, botanic gardens, and zoological gardens appeal to a certain sector of society. So I think we need to be seen to get down and dirty, if I can use that expression, and get our hands dirty, and that needs to come through clearly here. The second element really is about what follows, and that is following up with each other. And I do not believe in paper agreements, so I do feel that the communities need to get together, and I'll follow up certainly with you on this, and do some more thinking and have some more discussion about what key outputs might look like, so that we have something solid on paper and something to aim at. As you know, Thomas, we've had an agreement with the EASA and Excite for the last 5 years. I was late to that party. There needs to be an element of co-creation, which is a catchword at the moment, but coming up collectively with something that we can move forward with. So we need to make sure that happens.
Thank you. That's very important, action-oriented, and what follows. What follows in technical ways is straightforward. You will receive, and that's not what you meant, you will receive a mail from our secretariat with instructions for editing your draft papers, which we want to assemble in a proper document published by the Academy, freely accessible in the internet, hopefully getting a DOI, Philippa, and we will try also to get editorials out and communication. So this community will need to be at least committed to their papers. That's the hard work. And I know that's not easy. You have all written wonderful papers, and your PowerPoints are beautiful graphs and pictures, which, if they are not too difficult to replicate in a publication, should be entered into your written text, just as a technical remark. But you meant something else, Paul, follow-up action. I hope that in the ominous year of 2020, this community, the initiatives which we have discussed here, can come to bear on the big conferences, the follow-up to the SDGs from the biodiversity side, and the COP, and the run-up to the COP. There will be lots of events in all of our countries, and the The Pontifical Academy is engaging in conferences of the party. It was so at the last two climate change COPs in Krakow and Bonn, with certain effectiveness with local academies. And this is one idea which we should also keep in mind when COP CBD is in Beijing. Not in Beijing, in the south, in Yunnan, where there are the connections, Sergei. That's what that level of ambition I hope we can pursue. If you don't mind, Haile Mariam, can I briefly call on you?
Thank you.
Last words, the two of you.
I think I didn't have any comment because number 12, 14, and 15 has captured what should be included in this, short conversation we had as far as policy is concerned. So that's why I didn't raise any issue.
Thank you very much. Virgilio?
Well, first, I think we need a sort of a disclaimer in the beginning. As I read again in the text, I think we should not give the impression that we looked at the whole issue of biodiversity loss only through the lens of botanical gardens and museums and so on. So I think we should have a text saying that our focus in this meeting was museums and botanical gardens and so on, but not the whole agenda, because the whole agenda includes more than this. Secondly, I think we should make a link in the beginning to the report of IPBES, sort of re-stressing that we as a community, we support the findings of IPBES. Then 2 comments on protected areas. This is already in number 11, but I think it only speaks about national parks, and it should be broader than national parks. There are many other categories, yeah. So it should be protected areas in general. And then in 12, which talks about empowerment of people, I think there should be some comments about indigenous peoples more precisely. And finally, in number 6, I think when it talks about consumption patterns and so on, I think maybe we should have a word about reducing the ecological footprint, as Peter Raven was mentioning the issue of ecological footprint. And I agree with Peter Raven as well, and others who made comment about the need of a press release. So maybe this could be an appendix, and somebody from the communication side of the story, maybe Philippa or somebody, can write a press release. And the press release, the wording that I would suggest is something very simple like this. We call for urgent action to save plant and animal species that power ecosystems, that provide us the air we breathe, the fresh water we drink, the food we eat, and medicine we depend on, among other things. So something that people can relate to. It's not an abstract concept of biodiversity. So that's, and I have those suggestions in writing. I'll just send it to you.
Excellent. Please give them to me in writing. I've taken note, but excellent points. Marcelo, you and I are supposed to close this. Why don't you do that?
But I close to say thank for all your presence here, for your participation, for your activity, and I think the conclusion is very nice. I don't have any comments, only to say that I am very happy. And of course, maybe we can organize a commission to the follow-up of these things, maybe next year. The president is very interested in this question because it's part of his specialty. So we are sure that we are in the program these things. Nothing. We need to say that was a very important meeting and very important conclusions, and original because it's a new thing. and to put together these people, I am very happy. And also the religious question, that the input was very important, because as say Pope Francis, to defend our planet and our common house and the human dignity and the dignity of the thing of the creation, we don't need to agree exactly in the interpretation of God. So we are very happy that our friends speak better than me about the religious question. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Marcelo, the hope, of course, accompanies you that a Spanish translation of this, once we have finalized it, will be channeled to the Holy Father, and as an indication that we, the Academy, with this broadened community, are following up vigorously on Laudato Si. And next year, in 2020, when COP in China is happening, would be an opportune time for Pope Francis to articulate on protecting our planet one more time again.